Hey everybody, this is Dawson's new youth programs podcast. My name's Emmett. Welcome to the lobby. Don't forget to sign in. We have our guest, Sam. Do you want to introduce yourself?
What's up, y'all? Sam, S.K., C's, depending on what era you met me in, but yeah.
And I'm Matthew. I'm a youth that comes to Dawson. So.
Fantastic. Let's just get into it, man. Well, Sam, you introduced yourself, but what kind of... You're a creative.
Yes.
We brought you on to talk about creativity, some, different facets of creativity. Why don't you...
elaborate on my, So I'm going to take the whole hour just explaining this. No, so I'm a multimedia artist, creative. I started off as a graffiti writer first, and then spent about 10 years really focused on rap. And then through rap discovered graphic design and then photography and yeah, now I kind of I'm founder and co-creative director of a brand called Quartier, and I work very closely with an organization called ES.KAY. So yeah, jack of all trades and hopefully master of some at some point in this whole lifetime. So yeah,
definitely jack of all trades. Didn't you? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you mentioned when we had a conversation together, you also were involved with dancing, right? You danced for a bit? For fun or?
Yeah, it was more in front of the mirror stuff.
Passion project.
Yeah, breakdancing early on, when I discovered hip hop, I took a shot at pretty much everything. But yeah, I don't think I could ever qualify. I don't think I could put dancer on my resume, especially now. If they check my references, I don't think
You
so.
don't want to try.
No, exactly. Someone say, "Show me." I don't know. I don't know if I have it.
Like another time.
Yeah.
Maybe some other time, yeah.
Only once you get the job,
Exactly. Exactly.
Definitely. Well, when did you get started? Like, how old were you
When I started
moving into a creative space in any way?
I'd say, it's super young because I grew up in an artistic household. So my father's a painter, very, very, probably one of the biggest inspirations for me creatively is my dad, just because, like I said, painter, interior designer, owned an antique shop, entrepreneur, had to make it happen. So as young as I can remember, and my mother was my father actually also worked on set design. My mother worked on set design as well, and she didn't necessarily exercise her creativity as much because when we moved here, first generation immigrants, she spent a lot of time with us. She, got a job at a daycare, and she learned how to speak French, and she was very involved in our academic life. So I didn't get to see her, and then she passed away when I was 9. So I didn't really get to know her creative side as much. But my father, obviously, we still go back and forth on stuff, and I still actually advise him on some of his paintings, and he asks my opinions. And so I started super young. As young as I can remember, I was doing little drawings, and I was really intrigued by just my dad had all the materials. So I know before I could remember, I drank a bottle of ink. So that was, I guess, my intro to the materials. But yeah, just even doing straight lines was something I practiced at home because I watched my father do these design work, and I was always so amazed by how steady his hand was. So as soon as I could get involved, and then when I started graffiti, I ruined all of his expensive markers, and so that was probably around when I started really being dedicated or really obsessed with creating was probably, I'd say, 10, 11, when we picked up graffiti from my older brother, and then I was probably 5th or 6th grade probably, and yeah, from then it was just kind of an obsession. How many papers I went through in notebooks and every agenda, and then from there it kind of, like I said, it turned into rap. Rap was about 16, 15 when I started, and went up until recently. I was still saw myself as a recording artist, pretty decent. I wouldn't call it a career, so to speak, but I had a good run. I recently decided to put music on the back burner just for a little bit. just to focus on the stuff that I have going on, because I found I was spread out a little bit too thin, and I wasn't giving it the attention that I thought it merited, and that I had a team around me that was kind of depending on me to put stuff out, and I just felt my heart wasn't in it, so I just said I wanted to put it on hold to go kind of focus a little bit, but yeah.
Do you think being around creatives, you were raised by creatives, right? Do you think like that barrier to entry was like lower for you, or like maybe it was just easier to get into creative mindset because you were already around that? Do you think that's part of the influence, maybe?
Yeah, I think it's easier because you have access to materials, which is part of creativity, obviously. You have reference points, and you have the kind of, you start to develop an eye for things. Like, you just subconsciously you pick up on things, right? So my strength, for instance, when I started doing graffiti, or even like, as early as graffiti, I had a heads up on a lot of my peers, and I noticed that my brother did too. So it wasn't that we were necessarily gonna be better graffiti writers in the long term, because practice obviously it adds more value. But we all started at the same time, and some of us were better than others, and I think there's a reason for that. I mean, I never really tried to pinpoint exactly what it was, but for sure, just having reference points, just growing up around colors and composition and materials, and my dad being that he was an antique salesman, and a lot of the stuff that we had in the house would be sold, so we had to be really careful with everything, because everything was essentially, I lived in a showroom.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
that's actually crazy to think about it.
Yeah,
so it's basically you're gonna be having like new stuff all the time.
Yeah, and I mean, we didn't grow up rich, but a lot of my friends would my friends would come over and assume that we had money just off the decor, right? Because they're like, wow, like it compared to a lot of first generation immigrant families who are just not necessarily spending money on a nice, big dining room table, all wood, refurbished, tables, glass tables. Like, even my TV, my dad put in like a antique armoire, so you had to open the doors to see the TV, and like, so it gave off a sense of wealth, exactly, but it wasn't ours. On the contrary, it was like, be super careful because I'm gonna have to sell it. So my dad was very neat, and he built in that kind of like clean freak mentality. Like, my friends will be over and I'm Windexing the table while we're still hanging out, because I have that built in, you know what I mean? So like,
if I ever saw that, I'd be like, yo.
Well, that's what they were doing, but it paid off, because it kind of, as you get older, you realize the value of taking care of your stuff, right? When you start to spend your own money and you start to buy things that you like, and things you're able to sell them after you wear them because you took care of them, especially now with thrifting and all that. So, so these kind of habits were built into me, but it was definitely I had an easier entry to creativity because I lived in it, for sure.
That's dope. Matt, what do you, you're creatively inclined, I would say, from what I've seen, like, in terms of like music, in terms of your own art, like, what do you think, what do you think, what helps you get into creative mindset as a youth starting out, to a certain extent, you know what I mean?
To be honest, I don't even remember the first time I got into like drawing and stuff. That's probably around like grade 6, grade 7, around that area. I don't know, just seeing like references online of things. It's just like, oh yeah, it'd be like those like how-to videos on YouTube, like how to draw, and it'd be like, I don't know, like Kermit the Frog or the Grinch or something. And I'm like, oh, that's sick. I'd want to do that. And I'd learn like, I don't know, I guess like simple shading and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I honestly just really like the more simplistic style, something like Jim Joe or. Oh yeah, really a big Jim Joe fan.
Yeah. Really, yeah?
Yeah.
That's dope. One of my homies has a Jim Joe piece.
I literally have a tattoo, like a Jim Joe tattoo. Obviously, it wasn't done by him, but it's like one of those things that he drew on, I think it was in New York. It says, "All my styles are wild."
Right.
And that's just something that's just like stuck with me since I saw it. I only saw it like a month or 2 ago. It's just, I don't know, it just feels like it fits me well.
No. I think, I don't know what Jim Joe's mind like, but I think that might be a reference to Wild Style. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's actually a documentary on graffiti and hip hop. You should definitely check it out.
It'd probably be influenced because Jim Joe is a graffiti artist in New York. Well, he's based in Montreal, but he got his start in New York.
Yeah,
that was pretty cool.
Yeah, But yeah, you should definitely check out Wild Style. It's probably the most, I'd say, concise and clear breakdown of hip hop culture, because it's very honest. It was shot in the late '80s.
Okay, so around like when it was picking up.
Exactly. So
Okay.
it's in, but there's a lot of key figures in there, and they talk about every element and how they were birthed, and also how they, what the value was and why they are the way they are. So it's like, I know there's a lot of hip hop documentaries out there, but Wild Style is the, I would say the most important one.
It probably is a like homage to it, if anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like is it in New York? Because I know that's.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, yeah. It's all about train culture,
Okay.
like the subway culture, the early hip hop crews, the Rocksteadies, DJ culture, break, like, just, it's all in there. But it also just really shows you, how young the culture was, because the people that are being interviewed are not like refined and necessarily well-spoken, eloquent kind of artists. They're just very raw, and you get to, see them talk about why they do it, and sometimes not have the answers to why they do it, but display the spirit, as honest as it can be, So I definitely would check that out if I were you. I think you'd enjoy it.
Because
Yeah.
This is like right up my alley.
Yeah.
I appreciate like a kind of like realism in art when it comes like I don't know if you're familiar with like Daniel Arnold, a photographer.
Mm-hmm.
He's like a street photographer. You can tell like his art is very like it's really like not random, but it's just candid. Like he'll capture people on the street. He like lives in New York. He'll go around Manhattan, just he's capturing like the day to day. And so like if I'm hearing you right, like those artists that like speak from the heart, or like have like that raw style.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but like art, I find, in my opinion, when when you kind of like break down the veils and you're not like trying to hide anything, and you really like expose or like expose what you're thinking, feeling, and whatever medium you choose, music, writing, visual art, it can be more impactful,
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I believe in, like, I think that it doesn't necessarily. You can be surreal. I mean, I just think that when the perspective that you're sharing is, when you adapt that perspective and you live it,
Yeah.
I think it speaks to it gives it more weight in the way people consume it. If you are a wild kind of surreal painter and you do all this, like, really like acid trip type images and really like psychedelic type images, but then you're a really square individual that never takes any drugs or never really experimented or lives a very like simple life, there's a disconnect between your art and who you are, and sometimes that can turn people off. It can also be intriguing if the gap is wide enough, because then it's like, whoa, like what an escape. Like this person is using it. So I think for every person, it varies in the way that the realism or the authenticity of it connects to them. But I think in general, if you're, if you're living what you're communicating, people can feel that, and then it enhances the experience, because the perspective that you're bringing, art is essentially just perspective. It's just a unique perspective. So if that perspective is tied to your experiences and who you are, then I think people can give it more value. That's why so many like troubled artists end up getting the most, grandiose kind of legacies, because I think people can relate to that struggle and empathize and actually like the drama of it. They don't want you to just be a dentist by day and an amazing artist by night.
Right.
They kind of it demystifies the art.
Yeah.
And art is about imagination, and it's about letting your mind take you to somewhere else. So you kind of want someone to live it so that you can kind of live through them a little bit with their art.
That's what makes art so personal. Even like your style of music, like I don't know, sometimes like and from speaking personally, like I won't send someone a song just because like it's it's music type is like super personal, you know what I mean? But on that note, your dad was from what you said, was a painter, like a classical artist in some sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you find, was there ever like any disconnect or like from like, because you got into graffiti, right? You got into different mediums. Was there ever like a disconnect in terms of like his style and your style? Was there ever like a back and forth in terms of like, no?
Nah. Uh, nah. Because to him, he doesn't understand the context, right? He doesn't. He sees one aspect of graffiti, and the one that is presented to him is usually, vandalism,
Okay.
right? So immediately he latches onto that, and that doesn't align with his ideology, so it discredits the art form. Same thing with music, right? When we discovered hip hop, my dad had never been exposed to hip hop before. All he had was mainstream references. Obviously, the mainstream is going to put forward the things that's more sexual, more violent, more Hollywood appeal. So then he would associate cursing and being loud, and he'd look at the initial layer. And even to this day, when I speak to him about my music, my dad always feels like he's like, it doesn't make me move enough. He's like, you got to make people dance. He's like, because he can't keep up with the pace of the lyrics. So he's only getting the surface layer, which is the rhythm and the sounds. And if a strong head nod doesn't appeal to him, that's not part of his culture, So yeah, there's definitely a disconnect. I think he has learned to respect my opinion a lot more. He recently, I don't know if he said it just to be nice, but I didn't spend too much time. But he said something. He's like, "Oh, you got like the best taste out of all of us." And for my dad, who has who made a living having good taste, being an interior designer, and for him to turn and to say to me that he thinks that I have good taste, speaks to how much respect. Yeah, it speaks to how much respect he's actually garnered from me and my art, because he's a lot truer to the artistic lifestyle, because what he always criticizes me about is that he's like, you don't study enough. And I think the difference between a creative and an artist and all of these kind of terms and the tiers of kind of artist, the true artist, the struggling artist, all these things that we talk about. I mean, the narrative is changing now, because a lot of those narratives were created to kind of downplay the value of art and creativity in our society. But now it's coming to the forefront how valuable these things are. But that disconnect over time, I think he's learned to respect the perspective that I bring to the table. And like I think with art, you have to be able to identify things. I think the intention in art is really important. Because the difference between a Picasso and a 5-year-old is that Picasso knew what he was doing and why he chose those colors and why the eye was slightly bigger and he knew all the rules and then broke them. Whereas if you just accidentally do something great, it can be great, but if you can't repeat it, then you can't really call yourself an artist. You know what I mean?
It's more accidental than intentional.
Right. So intention kind of narrows, really decides who the real artist is. If you decided to make me feel sad with your music, I felt sad. Can you do it twice? Can you do it 3 times? Oh, you figured out how to make people sad or make people happy or make people think, then you're starting to really be an artist. But if you just make a song and you play the chords and you don't really know why, I don't think it takes away from the body of work. But I think that you got to be careful whether you want to say that you're the artist, because then people expect you to be able to reproduce that. You know what I mean?
Well, me and Matthew were actually just talking about this a couple days ago. We were talking about rap and like its development throughout time. And I was talking about how like a lot of rappers now, or people who want to be rappers and they're just starting out, it feels like they're replicating what was done in the past, and less so like they're just like doing what works instead of what they want to do, and like treating it as an art form and saying what they want to say. You know what I mean? So, and it almost like dilutes the content of like whatever's being said or whatever art form. You know what I mean? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I go back and forth on that, because I've worked with a lot of young people. I think the first step of becoming an artist or exercising creativity is imitation. You have to copy, because there's no other way to really hone your craft. Like before I started rapping, what gave me an edge as an MC, or what made me a better rapper than some of my peers is that I really copied. I learned how to speak English listening to rap records, really. Like, I went to French high school, I went to French elementary school. So for me, it was like watching a Tupac video or watching a Snoop Dogg video, imitating the mannerisms, the gestures, the cadences, understanding the difference between when Busta Rhymes would rap fast and when Bone Thugs would rap fast, and what's the difference there? They're both rapping fast, but it sounds different, it feels different. And imitating and going on these sites and reading the lyrics and trying to rap along with them, copying the thing in the videos. Then when I started writing my own lyrics, all of a sudden I realized how valuable that practice and that imitation period was, you know? So I'm okay with people kind of starting off that way. And I've worked with a lot of youth in the studio, and I'll often, you know, they'll be copying people, and even the content is not their lives, right? They're talking about ice, and I'll pull up in this, and you don't have a license, and you don't have ice, right? And but that's what. So I'll allow it.
Yeah.
I'll question them and be like, you know, do you feel comfortable doing that? And often they'll be like, yeah, no, everyone does it, nah. But then you let them kind of. Then I've distanced myself from them, and then a couple of years later they come back, and they're now starting to. You hear the honesty come through in the music a lot more, and so I understand there's a period where people will imitate, but I think those people don't tend to last very long, and they tend to just maybe poke their head into the culture and then disappear, and they also don't get the feedback from people. People hear through it, see through it. Like, you can't fake it forever, you know. So I think that is part of the process. That imitation phase, I think, it's a necessary part of the process.
I didn't think of it like that. I mean, if you want to getting into any creative art form can be daunting. You don't know, like, if you're looking up to whatever idols in the field or whatever, and you're not able to live up to that, or if you think you won't be able to, imitation would be the best way in. Do you feel that way, Matthew? Like, when it comes to like your creative project that you're working on now, like, when do you look to other sources? Do you look to like other brands and think like, I
mean,
think
definitely. There's definitely some
that influences them. For sure.
I mean, like, there's a little logo I drew for like my brand, and I mean, what I was thinking about it, like, when I did it, I was just doing it like off the rip.
Right.
And I mean, while I'm looking at it and stuff, and I'm like, oh, it kind of reminds me of YG's like 400 logo. I mean, there's like some similarities. Or I was thinking, I'm like, oh, maybe I should put the 1 and then put like a big 1 and then have 12 at the bottom. I'm like, that's literally like YG's 400 thing, but like on his it's like the 4, and then it's like 100 and inside the 4. I don't know. I mean, there's definitely a lot of. I'm definitely starting out in like definitely imitation, considering. I mean, I want to get into like graffiti and all of that because I find that style just very like interesting and cool.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm writing on like the whiteboard over here, just like Jim Joe stuff, like increasingly unaffordable, or just like I don't change, I stay the same. Like I'm just writing like how he's writing too. I just like that like very simplistic style and not like perfect. It's very probably like raw.
Yeah.
It's not like someone trying to like, oh, it has to be this perfect. It has to.
Yeah. And it's ironic, sorry to cut you off, it's ironic that you mentioned Jim Joe, because Jim Joe's style is actually, he's, at some point, I'm pretty sure, I don't know him personally or anything like that, but I'm pretty sure he was probably a more pure graffiti writer at some point, and then his style probably evolved. And again, he's one of the people that you can look at his style and easily say, I can do that.
Yeah.
You know, but you can't, because he knew all the rules. He understands spacing, he understands, placement, he understands impact, all of it. So probably has, Jim Joe probably started doing some other types of graffiti at some point and probably had a whole different style. Then he kind of probably discovered himself. I don't know, I'm assuming, but it seems like that's a refined simplicity. And the more you do, the more you realize that simplicity is actually harder than complex types of art. So when people look at you and say, I can do that, most likely they can't. And most likely you've kind of gotten to an expert level, a mastery of your craft, because giving that impression is actually really difficult to do. And I think that boils down to imitation. Again, brings us back to a lot of people will look at something and say, I can do that. Oh, I heard a Drake song. I can rap. Like, wow, super, blah, 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 blah. It's mumble rap. Look, I can do it. And then you start to actually attempt to do it.
Yeah.
Then you record your own voice doing it. And you realize how far you are from that.
It always seems easy until like you actually have to do it. Like, yeah, I can do that. But.
I mean, it's like when I was doing for a project for a history class like a couple years ago. It was pretty interesting because my teacher was like, "Oh, choose any Canadian artist." So I'm like, "All right." So I went back to Jim Joe again, and I basically just had this big like white long Bristol board and did Jim Joe's Mona Lisa. And I thought it was so difficult. I thought it was so like difficult to do, considering, I mean, those lines aren't straight and you're trying to like recreate them and you're like, well, that's off. So basically it's just me just trying to like get it like perfectly.
Yeah.
And then when I handed it into my teacher, he's like, this is not art. This guy, I wasn't even there because I was late, because I was always late. And my friends were telling me, he's like, oh, he was just like shitting on it. He was just saying like, oh, this is not art, it's just a couple lines. Meanwhile, I found that crazy. I was like, I mean, what can you say is not art? Because like it's very saying something's not art is just very.
Well, you can say it.
Well, yeah, you can say it's not art,
but it doesn't decide for anybody else.
Anyone can, anybody can think anything's art and be like, oh, that bottle of vitamin water right there. Mm-hmm. If you take a picture of that, like my dad would probably take a picture of that and be like, oh, this is amazing. Mm-hmm. And for me personally, I'd just be like. It's literally just it might speak to him, but then it doesn't speak for me. So
well, it's on that. There's always pushback. I feel like it's a generational thing. What you mentioned Picasso before.
Yeah.
There's a painting he did that broke all the rules, and I forget what it's called, but there were protests. People thought it was ugly. People thought it was like an insult to the art of painting, and now in 2021, it's viewed as like a masterpiece for breaking those conventions. So that's just how it is when it comes to art.
Well, most great artists don't get their credit until they're dead anyways.
Yeah.
That's
seeking credit for art is unartistic in itself. But I think the main difference between art and creativity, so let's say we're talking about the they can't see it, but like a vitamin water or the branding on any kind of Gatorade bottle or anything like that. It took an artist it took a creative to execute that, but what makes art is that unique perspective that you bring to it, right? If someone can just kind of copy what your idea was, or follow a template and get to the same result, then it kind of takes away a little bit of it from the art form or from the the way it's perceived. But I think if you do something that's very unique, like a Jim Joe, who's carved a space for himself with this style that is associated to him and that is universally known for being him, or Banksy, or whoever else is like these mainstream artists that everyone kind of like, gives value to. It's just really their perspective, timing, context. You can't remove art from the time, and it defines it. It's like a Picasso, like you're saying, like because he did it at that moment, it was that valuable. Had he been the 20th person to do that, then maybe no one remembers him today, right?
It would be too saturated at that point.
Right? So, and think about that. Like at the time Picasso was doing it, pre-internet, pre-everything, 20 people doing what you did was too saturated. Now you got millions of people doing the same thing, right? So how do you separate yourself from them? And I think I'm learning that more and more,
What were you gonna say, Johnny?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you live off your art and your creativity? How are you able to
keep going? But before you answer, I'll add to that because that's
live
exactly
off of that and do it with integrity? Because sometimes if you're not making huge money, and is it selling out if you go something like that wouldn't be you? You know what I mean? How do you stay
like true to yourself?
True to yourself and still be able to live off what you're doing now?
I was just about to ask something similar because you just said to seek credit for art is unartistic. How do you reconcile that with entrepreneurship, the business versus artistic side of entrepreneurship, right?
It's a compromise. I hate compromising in life. I don't believe in it necessarily, but it's a compromise. No, but I don't, because I think compromise is parallel to mediocrity. You know, I think if you want to be, I think even the idea, I've read this in the last couple of years of people saying you need a balanced lifestyle. That's garbage too. You know, no one great at anything has lived a balanced lifestyle. You have to give all of yourself to something. And if you give all of yourself to something, you're going to neglect something else in return. You just don't have enough of you to go around for everyone, right? So if you're giving 80% of yourself to your art and the other 20% is to shower and eat, then having a girlfriend and having a job and all of that seems really tough. Now, how do you make a living off of it, or how do you balance, you know, getting paid for it? Well, first of all, you humble yourself and you recognize that no one's going to pay you for anything you just started. So if you didn't put in work, there's few people that are just so talented, and again, the situation presents themselves where either they're part of a community or a family that's able to open doors for them and to put them in a position where they can get paid right away, cool. But for most people, I think, who don't have that kind of you got to pay your dues, and it's corny and it's cliche, but there's no way around it. You know, you're talking to someone now. I still don't live off of my art exclusively. I'm 15 years into, you know what I mean, taking art really seriously, 20 years into trying to be an artist in one way or another. And it's, you know, in some ways I do get paid for thinking like an artist in all of my jobs, but to directly eat off of sales of my art, you know, it's not necessarily, I'm not at that stage where I could say, yeah, you know, I live the life of my dreams and everything I do comes from me just being 100% true to myself at all times. Even just taking client work as a freelance creative, it's not being true to yourself. But if you do enough of your own stuff on the side, eventually the clients hire you for what you do. And that's when you start to transition, and that's when it's easier to because now when someone comes to you and says, I just do what SK does, you know, do your thing, and I just want that for my business, then I'm able to say, okay, that's where I'm able to, you know, say that I have a little bit more integrity. But even that, I mean, you got to get paid, you know. It's not, when you're young and you're willing to live on the couch and not eat ramen noodles, that's where you got to really push and go hard for your art, because that's where you're okay with living that lifestyle. So give all of yourself to it. As you get older, at my stage, I have responsibilities. I have a certain standard, a certain lifestyle that I want to be able to live. So, you know, there's times where I want to do certain things creatively. Like I have 3-4 projects. I was just talking to someone today before I came here. I have 3-4 projects that I have these ideas that I think are really good, and I've been thinking about them for a while. I can't execute them for at least 2 to 3 years. You know what I mean? Because I don't have the resources, I don't have the time, the place that I need to execute on these ideas. So, to get back to what you were saying, how do you live off your art? You just do enough of it when you can, and try to share it with enough people so that people, if it's good enough or if it's interesting enough, people want to. And consistency is key in that sense, because for people to think of you as an artist, they have to see your art all the time and then know that that's what you do. And then eventually, you know, your friends get older and now they're decorating their apartments and they want to pay you for a painting or a photo or a frame or a book or whatever, you know. So it's tough. It takes time. And I don't think you should feel guilty as an artist, because when you do kind of freelance work, or when you, I would love to, the pure artist, like, because see, there's entrepreneurship kind of skews the way I talk about it. It doesn't give me a choice, because I have to be realistic about it. The real artist in me wants to say, you know, suffer for your art. Don't compromise. You know, if you're gonna, I'd rather only do art for me and go work as a janitor overnight than to go and work as a graphic designer for a company that I don't believe in by day and then fund my art that way by night, because it kind of skews it blends the two worlds together, and then that kind of can affect your art. You know, I'm not giving any advice to anybody. Do whatever works for you. Everyone is so unique, but time and consistency and hard work eventually will get you to a place where you can get paid off for your art eventually, but you got to tug it out.
So you say like it's hard to compromise. You work with a team of people that they happen to be your friends. How does that even work for you to like push your ideas? And
It's interesting. I laugh because I've learned to control myself. I used to fight for every tiny detail, and it's not a good, dynamic. It's not a good team dynamic. Time gets spent on things that are obviously and honestly not really important in the grand scheme. You kind of got to take a step back and look at the big picture and work backwards from your goal. What's my goal? What are we trying to accomplish? Okay, am I being efficient in fighting for every little detail here? So for instance, Darley's wearing a shirt. The logo on the shirt is a certain shade of green. I could have fought all day that I didn't like that shade of green.
you didn't want it?
I'm saying I could have. I didn't design that piece.
Okay.
That was designed by Henley, one of our team members. I gave my little input, but listen, it's one T-shirt, right? We're trying to be an international brand. We have other things to worry about. If I sit here and argue over the shade of green, I'm wasting energy and time that needs to be spent for me doing something else for the brand to move forward and for our ultimate goal to be achieved. So creatively, collectively, as a team, when it comes to my creative like approach, it's different than when I'm by myself. When I'm by myself, I don't have anyone else to check in with. If it feels right, it feels right. When I'm in the team, hey, look, sometimes it boils down to a vote.
Do you feel like your voice is represented in the art form, whatever you all create? Because then it could be it could be like a shirt, it could be a pop-up, it could be an experience, it could be like a video. Do you feel like, okay, people will know that's Sam, or that doesn't even matter because it has to be a group?
It's a group.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a group. I mean, inevitably, whatever I contribute creatively leaves my fingerprint on whatever we're presenting, but I definitely can honestly and wholeheartedly say that no, you wouldn't necessarily think that you would necessarily even recognize that it's me. Sometimes with my photography, my style is a little bit more evident or whatever, like, the wording when I write a certain copyright or a caption or whatever, you can tell that it's me if you know me. But no, I parallel things a lot to sports because that's, that was a big part of my life. And it's like, you got to be when you're a team player, you do whatever is needed of you to win. So the goal is winning. The goal is not for me to get my points as an individual, it's for the team to win. So, sometimes I have to just, sacrifice my opinion or learn to hold back or just all in all, just not even care about it because there's bigger fish to fry and there's more important things that we need to worry about than the single color on a t-shirt. Even though it's important, we do spend time. I don't want it to seem like we just throw anything together. We spend time, we try to make it cohesive, make sure everyone is in agreement that it's up to a certain standard. But once it's at that standard, there's always room for improvement. And there's always an opinion-based approach that we all can have a different view of what it should be. So once you recognize that, you're like, well, I'm not going to argue over something that you could be right and I could be right. So who's really right? And what's the point of us arguing and affecting our dynamic negatively as a team? Like, I'll let this one go. And eventually, when you work with people that understand you and that respect you, sometimes they take your opinion, sometimes they don't. You got to live with that. You got to accept that.
Well, that's kind of related to why you do what you do, right? Like having a reason for what you're doing. Like Cartier and La Rue Inspire is they're very community oriented, right? There's a mission there, to a certain degree, like the mission statement. And I find art more difficult to produce when you don't know exactly what's driving you, right? So what, with that being said, what would you the advice you would give like a young creative that does want to move into the entrepreneurial space, who wants to get their art out there?
Wow.
Loaded question.
Yeah. That's fine though. I mean, first and foremost, the only original thing that you have to contribute to the creative world is your unique perspective. there's nothing new under the sun, right? No idea is original. It's the Nas bar is no idea is original. There's nothing new under the sun. It's never what you do, but how it's done. So speak from a very honest and transparent place. Speak from, don't try to mold yourself to what you think people will like, because ultimately, if everyone likes it, then it's probably not that cool, because the majority of people, the masses don't dictate the cool. It's the few outliers. So be yourself unapologetically in your art. Tell your story. If you grew up upper middle class and the experiences that you're speaking on reflect that, then speak about what you know best, right? If you grew up in projects and you want to talk about that experience, speak to that. But the authenticity and the honesty is always going to hold more weight than anything else, because I think people are just, they gravitate towards things that are real, whether they know to find the words or not, whether they know that it's real for sure or not. They kind of have a feeling, and people are smart in that way, where they you know, the right things always bubble to the top, and those things tend to be honest. So that first would be to be yourself at all times, and not in the cliche way that everyone is special. No, that's your biggest asset. That's really all you have to offer. You're replaceable in every other sense, right? I could find a designer. I can go on Fiverr and get some guy in India to do the work for $5. It doesn't. That's not what I'm getting at a designer for. I'm getting at a designer. Huh?
And it would be terrible.
Or it would be really technically sound. But what would be the value? What would be the process? You know, what would be the growth? You know what I mean? Like, I know it depends what you're trying to execute. You know, it depends what your end goal is. So, and the other things I would say is, and I said earlier, is start from the end. Figure out exactly where you want to end up, who you want to be, how you see yourself. Like, have the house figured out, the car, the city, the smells, the food, the look of your clothes. Have it all be very, very clear in your mind. And then the path to get there will kind of carve itself out by default. So an example I often use is, okay, if I ask you, where do you want to live when you grow up? And you're like, oh, I want a mansion on the beach.
Where?
Okay, no, but that narrows you down immediately.
Yeah.
Right? Because then there's only so many beaches
Yeah.
that you can live on. That, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then from there, you go from, the entire planet to, let's say, 50 different beaches or 100 beaches that you could see yourself living in. And then you're like, well, what language are they speaking there? Oh, well, they're speaking English. Boom, narrowed. That much more narrow now. Right?
Yeah.
So now, every decision you make, creatively, business-wise, personal, if you really want that, then you have to make your decisions align with that.
Right.
Because eventually that's where you have to end up. You can't say, I want to go north and then start driving south. It doesn't make any sense. If you want to be in the south, then you got to drive south. That's it. There's no... So we spend a lot of time exploring and finding ourselves, and that's cool. But the ones that make things seem like, oh, wow, how did they get there so quickly? Or, wow, like, they just seem like they have such a clear vision. Well, it's because they're acting... All of their actions are in line with their goals. You know what I mean? You want to be a great basketball player. You can't eat McDonald's before every game. Yes, right now it might not matter for you. I walk into a gym and I see a kid stretching before the game and after the game. And then I see the super talented kid showing up 5 minutes late and laughing with his friends and, kind of joking. I don't care if that talented kid has the best game and scores the most points. The kid who's stretching before and after the game is already further along in his journey, because you can learn skill over time. Right. But the discipline that it takes, the mindset that you have to actually sacrifice that extra 10 minutes hanging out with your friends to do what you know will help you 20 years from now, because you have developed a habit of stretching and protecting your body parts. And
he's playing for the next game.
He's playing for life. He's playing for retirement. Forget the next game. He's playing for 20 years from now. And that person is going to get to where they need to get 20 years from now faster than the person who's stopping every 5 minutes to, look around. Both have value, both will have consequences on your life. You know, I'm not saying completely neglect everything, but I'm saying if you want to get somewhere, then the more you narrow your field of vision and the decisions you make, I think the best shot you'll have. But that's my two biggest kind of.
So do you think that because you're focused, I would say, right, from what you're saying, does that come at a price
100%.
for yourself
100%.
within, like, you know, your interpersonal relationships, your could be anything, like, I don't know, traveling, whatever your interests are beyond
Yeah.
whatever you're creating.
Oh,
It comes at a
100%.
price?
Well,
It's a
everything.
steep one.
Everything comes at a price. It's a trade-off. You can have amazing interpersonal relationships and friendships and amazing memories hanging out with your friends at the park, and your career won't be where it wants to be. Or you can focus on your career and your career is where it needs to be, but then you have terrible relationships with your family and your friends because you missed out. I haven't met anyone who has both at the same time all the time.
Well, that comes back to what you were talking about before about balance, right?
Yeah.
About balancing that part of your life. So, if you said, if I'm wrong, but you said like you don't believe in balance, or like no, you shouldn't. Balance.
I think it's overrated.
Overrated.
I think it's a concept that everyone strives for balance, but then at the same time everyone wants to be great.
It's almost contradictory.
Michael Jordan is a very strange human being. Michael Jordan is probably hated by as many people as he's loved.
Oh, for sure.
He's revered by a lot of people, but how many people actually know him, right? LeBron James again, sports is just a good example because people watch these people grow up and we watch their journeys. LeBron James is one of the best examples of someone who seems completely balanced, but he's an exception, A, and B, you don't really know what happens behind closed doors. You just have this impression because he has no scandals attached to his name that he's the perfect human. But he's like Superman. It's not even like the average person isn't 6'9", eloquent, super focused, family oriented, wants the best for his community. The average person is a lot more nuanced than that, you know? So it's like, yeah, there's always a price. It's just about priorities. What do you really want the most? You know, I think concepts like being a good family person are overrated. You know, I think family is super important. I think, relationships with human beings are super. It's the most networking. That's something just to bring you back.
Yeah.
Connect with people because people are at the root of everything. So having good relationships is so important. But if you let everyone know with your actions that you are so focused on one goal, like I'll use Satiz as an example. My partner, Satiz, founder of Quartier, founder of La Rue Inspire, great human being, really a great visionary and has had this long-term approach his whole life. Satiz has a son who actually comes to work with Darlie and counts 15. Satiz is so focused when it comes time to work. But at any given moment, he will leave anything he has to do and go drop off Keon at a basketball game. Go pick up Keon from school. Go, if he's sick, he goes home. You can never fault Satiz in any relationship that you have with him because it's so painfully clear to everyone what his focus is. That if he makes decisions based around that focus, you kind of just have to accept it. So now that's his kid, so it seems like, oh, that's a no-brainer. Obviously, he has to go take care of his kid. But it's not because it's his kid. It's because it's his priority. You understand? He chose to make his son his priority. Not everyone does that. Right? And they're allowed.
Yeah.
They're allowed to choose other priorities. But if you put everyone on alert, we're hanging out, but if I get inspired and I gotta go home, I'm gonna go home. Now the first couple of times your friend group might be like, yo, why are you leaving? Come on, we're hanging out. But after you've done it for 5 years and you pick up and go, your real friends are gonna be like, nah, let him go. Oh, you got inspired? Okay, you want me to drive you home so you can get there faster and work on what you gotta work on? And then when you surround yourself with people, when you put everyone on notice that, this is my priority, you not only attract people who are in line with those types of things, but your support system just accepts it. And they don't blame you and they don't resent you for not being there. Now what happens is when you look at like professional corporate life, a lot of people will like, it's all about work and I'm doing this for you. Well, that's a contradiction. because there's no amount of money that you could provide your family that will replace time. So you claim that you're doing all of this work for your children and for your wife and your family, and that's why you're at the office late, and that's why you miss all these birthdays, and that's why, because you're providing. But if you really prioritize your children, you would figure out a way to be with them, because you would recognize that the best thing you can offer them isn't financial security, it's time and all that. And usually people who are in that position, they're not talking about financial security for their children, they're building generational wealth. So it's not, so they probably are prioritizing, they probably feel guilty for wanting to do it for themselves, so they say that it's for you. But if they tell their families, look, this is like, I'm so locked in, maybe they shouldn't have a family. But we criticize, we have these templates that we just slap on people, and words like balance and all these things that we kind of label, and we say, hey, you got to have balance and you got to be a family person, or else what's all this for? It can be just for you, so just put people on notice as early as you can, and I think it solves a lot of the...
Well, does that mean that art will always be not just art, but creativity and everything that comes with it, with your entrepreneur? Projects and all these things will always be priority?
No. You can change your priorities at any given moment. I mean, just put everyone on notice. And again, things with like creativity, what's cool about creativity or whatever is that you apply it in any context. If you want to spend time with your kids doing arts and crafts, and while they're doing their version of arts and crafts, you're doing yours, that's still, you know what I mean? You're still able to... Yeah, you're able to do both, right? But
Sure.
Nah, your priorities can change. A lot of creative people go their whole lives, go, and then when they have kids, they're like, no, I don't want to. I want to spend time with my family. This is my priority. Basketball players, corporations, everyone leaves money on the table, opportunities on the table, because once your priorities are identified, then again, you have to move backward from the goal. Yeah. So if your priority is your kids, then all of your decisions revolve around your kids. Right. If your priority is your art, all of your decisions revolve around your art. If you're going to start dating someone and that person isn't clear on what your priorities are, and you make them feel like they're your priority, but then really your priority is something else, that's when the issues occur. Right. But if you tell them, look, I'm coming home late, I'm in the studio, this is what I'm doing, if you want to be with me, this is the cost. And if you're able to accept that you might not have a girlfriend or a significant other because you're so focused, then you live with that comfortably. Look, it gets lonely. It gets hard. There's no way around the cost. You have to pay somewhere, right? But you do get to decide where, and you can save a lot of grief. You can save a lot of grief by telling people what you really prioritize and being honest with them about what you want.
Matt, with this conversation being had, do you think what are some things that you think as a youth, because you're starting out as a creative there, I know you have some things that you want to do in the creative space artistically. What do you think the biggest things that you took away from the advice given, as a youth, where whatever Sam said was yeah, I got to get on that. You know what I mean? Is there a spot that you think oh, maybe I'm lacking here?
Well, I mean, so maybe just circle back to when you were saying how I don't know, you're just chilling with your homies and stuff, and then you're oh, you got I don't know, a light, a light in your, okay,
a light bulb,
yeah, something like that. You're oh, I have to go do this, and you're oh, can you oh, I'm gonna have to leave. Yeah. And most people would be oh, why do you have to go? I mean, I'd probably be one of those type of people and be bro, just stay. And no, it's kind of that idea. It's oh no, you have to go because you want to go. Well, you want to pursue you want to pursue your career, whatever you want to whatever you want to grab, whatever your goal is. And I don't know, I could probably hang out less with my friends and I don't know, more focus on more the brand I want to create or the company. And I don't know, but then also going back to how we were saying how people will call you people will call you a flake, really. Yeah. I mean, be oh yeah, I'm gonna go oh, we're gonna hang out tonight at 7:30, for example. Yeah. And you're oh bro, can't come because I got inspired. A lot of people will, the people that I guess you can say not real friends would be oh bro, you're such a flake, you're such this, you're this and that. But meanwhile, you're saying I mean, your real friends would be like, "Oh, bro, no worries, it's blessed. Like,
Pursue that.
do what you have to do. Exactly.
They know
Do what
how
you
much
have to do
that
to
goal
get to
means
that goal.
to you. Yeah, they know how much that goal means to you. But also in those scenarios, it's in my experience, I'll be like, I'll remember.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
I'll get to this some other time. But I don't know. You can't replace that initial spark. You know what I mean? To get back. I know exactly what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
and
for
and
sure.
that's a small scale example, but
Yeah.
it's not only just art. Like we had a friend that would leave a lot of our functions to go home and eat. Um, we'd be hanging out and we'd all be like, "Yeah, we're gonna eat," and he's like, "All right, I'm gonna go home," and he was an only child, and we clown him. Only child, of course he's gonna leave and go eat, or we'd go play ball and we'd go, I'll hang out after ball, and he's like, I'm gonna go home and shower, and we'd be like, bro, none of us are showering. Like, let's just go hang out. Like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? But as we got older, I realized, he kind of like he was his own priority. Now, whether it's because he was an only child and he was used to it or whatever it was, like his comfort, maybe he wanted to go home and spend time with his family. And that's corny to a bunch of teenagers.
Yeah.
That's the truth. It's corny. We called him, we cracked jokes on him. To
Yeah.
this day, we're still friends, but it's still that reoccurring joke. But, he's doing what he wants to do in life, and you learn to accept it. You know what I mean? You got to force people to deal with you, not the other way around. You know what I mean? And if no one wants to deal with you because you're that focused on you, then you have to be okay with that. Because if you seek validation externally, you're never gonna be comfortable with being alone and doing what's best for you. Because the truth is, what's good for you is not necessarily always good for those around you. And sometimes people they want you for them more than they want you for you. They want you because of the comfort or the fun that it brings them. They don't necessarily want you because they really have this unconditional love for you. And so I'm not saying eliminate friendships or hangouts. I'm saying sometimes hanging out with your friends is inspiring. But I will say that I spent a lot of time in my 20s hanging out. I spent all my 20s hanging out every day. Every day. I did not miss one day of chilling in my 20s.
That's basically what I'm going through now.
Not one day. Every single day, clockwork. I'm hanging out with a group of friends. We're doing what we're doing. My 20s are a blur.
Mine too.
My 20s are a blur, and I don't have regrets, but I can tell you that had I applied some of the focus that I'm applying in my 30s and my 20s, my 30s would be more enjoyable.
Time wasted? You feel?
Not wasted, just spent irresponsibly.
Okay.
Because there's always value. There's value in those memories and those connections. I have experiences. The stories of what we were doing when we were mischievous and hanging out are what fuels my creativity and my perspective now. It's always a trade-off. It's not like an empty thing. But, there's purchases that you make that you look back on and you're like, maybe I could have been a little bit wiser with that. Maybe I would have gotten more value for that time. So it's not wasted, but it's spent maybe irresponsibly. You know what I mean?
That's a good point, Matt. Oh, go ahead. Darling, yeah.
I just wanted to, because I know Sam is a very busy person.
Yeah.
I just wanted to keep us on, schedule and such. And then, I have, one last question, but you can...
I just want to say what Matt said about knowing when to cater to your inspiration. The other thing, the biggest takeaway is having a vision of where you want to be, having that end goal, because then you figure out your why you're doing what you're doing, and that just gives you, I don't know, more motivation to achieve it. So I would say those are the biggest takeaways that for any young person, anyone that's getting acclimated or getting into the creative space for the first time, and trying to do the best they can with it.
Yeah. And your why can change.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't feel the pressure that you have to decide now and that's what it is for the rest of your life. Your why can change.
Wow.
But whatever your why is, align with that. And I think there's no right way of doing this. I'm just speaking from my personal experience. There's no right way or wrong way of being an artist. Things that work for me don't necessarily work for someone else, That's totally normal, and thank God, because it would be dry if everyone had to go through the same steps to get. But there's certain traits and certain things that you just can't bypass, you know, and that's work. But another thing about being an artist is that I don't make art because I want to. I make art because I have to. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't do it. I didn't rap because I wanted to be a famous rapper. I rapped because I loved rap music, and I wanted to understand, and I wanted to perform it, and I wanted to feel the feelings that came with it. I didn't start taking pictures because I wanted to be a photographer, a world-renowned photographer, or anything like that. I took pictures because I had a need for it in my life. So I tried quitting rap multiple times in my life. I couldn't do it because as a person, I just need an outlet for the things that I think and the feelings that I have. So, you know, you're an artist. Being a creative is kind of like it's a task, but you know you're an artist when you can't escape the want to do stuff, you know? So you might be hanging out with your friends, but even when I was hanging out with my friends, we were freestyling, we were listening to records, we were, you know what I mean, watching videos, you know what I mean? So we were doing graffiti a lot of times. So I had a friend group that was all artists as well, you know, and that allowed me to find value in those things. But don't fool yourself into thinking that you hanging out with your friends and listening to records is you doing the work. It's not the work. It's just, you know what I mean? It's just the work. The work is like that. Every day, I'm gonna do something. An hour, I'm gonna do something that is just, even when I don't feel like it, I'm gonna do it because I see the long-term benefit. Then after that, go hang out with your friends and consume. You know, I'm at a point now where I maybe I don't live off of my art fully, but I live my art fully.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, everything I do aligns with my purpose. Everything from my job that I get paid for that I'm maybe not super interested in, to the hobbies that I have, to the friends that I choose, to the things that I do on my free time. You know, I'm leaving here to go to an art gallery. I'm not gonna go buy anything. You know what I mean? I wanna. I'm not going there to show face and network. I'm going there because I like this artist and I want to see it. But that's gonna potentially inspire me and add value to what I'm doing as an entrepreneur.
That speaks to me so much because that's how I live my life. I have like 2 questions just to wrap it up.
To wrap up,
one is like, do you think you can be great at many things? Because you said you have to be focused, right, and give your all. Do you mean give your all to all the mediums you want, or give you all to like one thing and then to the next one?
See, that's tough for me because it's a contradiction in who I am as a creative. You can be good at a lot of things. You can't be great at everything.
But then you got guys like Childish Gambino, who's like, he's doing stand-up, he's doing music, he's writing Atlanta, he's an actor. He's great in so many different spaces.
Yes, but I will say that, again, I can't speak for anybody else's process, but I will say that you can master something and then pick up something else.
Right.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Kanye is a really good example of that. Kanye wanted to be a rapper, but before he was a rapper, he mastered being a producer.
Yeah.
Then he started rapping. Then he wanted to be but then he became a multi-platinum, world-renowned rapper. Then he moved on to clothes. Now he has the biggest clothing brand, a streetwear brand or whatever. He proved himself. Now he might want to design airplanes, right? So he gives all of himself for a period. It doesn't require a lifetime to become great at something. It requires a certain amount of time and energy, but you can compress that into 2 years if you give yourself all the way. It might take a lifetime if you're doing bits and pieces, if you're chipping at it. Then it might take you a lifetime to become a good photographer. But if you immerse yourself in photography and if you like shoot every day for 2 years, then you'll fast track that mastery. You know what I mean? So yeah, you can't be great at everything at the same time, or you can't learn to be great at everything at the same time. You should probably focus on one thing, feel like you've mastered it, and then maybe move on to a different thing, and then merge them. And that's something I didn't do. I never really mastered. I mastered music. I mastered rap. I could say that confidently. I think that as a lyricist, as an artist, I still had a lot of room to grow as a rap artist. But as a lyricist, I think I mastered that part.
Your writing skills, your poetry.
Yeah, my delivery, my understanding of the timing and the cadence and just my ear. So I mastered that, and then I jumped into graphic design. I have not mastered graphic design by any stretch, and I have no intention to. quite frankly. Right now, I'm trying to improve my photography, but my aim overall is not necessarily to be seen as the greatest photographer of all time. I'm still kind of recalibrating myself because I'm learning these things as I go. My dad used to push me to be specialized in one thing, and I hated it because it didn't align with my personality. But I understand now what he was trying to say, and I think he was unable to communicate it in a way that made sense to me. He was never presented to me as figure this out and then move on to something else. Right. The beauty of starting young is, how old are you right now?
18.
Yeah, so I mean, in 3 years you could have mastered production,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then you can decide that you want to explore something else. But if you do 10 things at once, then guarantee you in 3 years you're not going to have mastered any of them. And that's not a knock on how your process is, but the results are going to speak for themselves. You know what I mean? It's really hard to be amazing at a bunch of different things because again you're not giving the attention, the focus that and the sacrifice that's required to one thing for it to really bloom. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yes. My last question, the last question. What's next for you?
Ooh.
I know.
What's next for me is honestly just locking in on the brand, on Cartier, trying to take it, to use the momentum that we have and take it to another level. And yeah, that's really like I'm trying not to say anything else because I really want to lock in, and that's where I'm at. I put some things aside, and my decision making and everything revolves around that. So yeah, I want to really push Cartier to the furthest extent that we can.
So what's next for Cartier then?
Cartier is growing our audience, learning about the back end stuff that comes with being an entrepreneur, being a business, figuring
What does
out.
that mean?
I mean, the logistics, right? Like we make T-shirts, but then, there's a lot that goes into a simple T-shirt, right? Production, marketing, distribution, having a space, not having a space, online advertising, all of these things that are not interesting to us as creatives, but are necessary for the brand to grow. So first, we want to make sure that we can get ahead of the creation of the content that we need and of the build our stories out, be ahead of schedule so that we're not creating at the last second and then putting pressure on ourselves to produce at a fast rate to not have to make sacrifices. But yeah, so internally we want to fine tune our engine and our machine. That's a goal of ours, while externally making sure that we continue building on this momentum and go to more of an international approach.
Be broke.
Not being broke.
No, I'm gonna be broke.
Why?
Because I keep supporting, keep buying, which is great. I'll continue to do so.
Yeah.
But I think it's my first time hearing you say, or a Cartier representative, international, right? But you guys have such a strong community, local following.
Yeah.
That do you think that the jump will be easy, or do you think it will be?
No, we're gonna lose people.
Okay.
We're gonna lose people locally because some people don't want or not ready to grow with you. But for anyone we might lose locally, we have a global community. And also it's not about losing people. It's just bro, we see what our impact is locally. We see the influence that we have on people.
So.
Yeah, we see it.
Huge. Yeah.
We see it. And we see people doing things that are similar to what we do and starting to build their own kind of. So now we're like, all right, well, how do we've paved this way for them. How do we continue to pave it?
Okay,
how do we take it? No.
You don't mind people emulating,
Not at all.
mirroring. Okay, that's really dope.
Not at all. We encourage it. I mean, that's what we want. If the message is community and to take care of each other and to be creatives and to believe in ourselves and all of the things that we're pushing, then that means eventually you're gonna do the things that I've done. Imitation is necessary. So I'm not judging you for imitating me. I'm encouraging you in your imitation. You're not going to be able to do what we do. We're not insecure about what we do. I mean, we're 15 years in, 20 years in into being who we are as creatives. So there's no insecurity for us of people doing something similar or having a similar message. If anything, that just means that it's working. It's working. It's picking up steam. Okay, now our local community is in good hands. Let's go to a different place and do what the local people what they're doing. They can't do what we want to do at the next stage because they haven't had the experience. It's not a matter of skill. It's just a matter of time.
Okay.
before they can get to that place. You know what I mean?
I think that's
To look globally, to look out for you guys.
Yeah.
I mean, where can they find you guys?
Quartiershome.com, Quartier's Home on IG, larinspire.com, by SK, if you want to find me personally, by SK.com as well.
I was just about to say that's a great place to end it. And I was going to shout out your website, buysk.com. His music's there, his visual art's there. It's fantastic. I can attest to it. So I will. We can put some of those links in the description. That's not a big deal. So whoever's listening can access that more easily. We'll get those resources out there. Sam, thank you for coming by, man. It was a great time.
I'd love to call me back for part 2.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
There's more questions to be had, you know?
Of course.